recording. See, it's recording.
Mm-hmm. So 5 minutes. Okay, this is a test.
So action 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Kurosawa, Bergman, Fellini. Okay.
So Eric,
So we're rolling.
rolling.
Episode 1.
Uh-huh.
I only agreed to do this with you if you let me smoke a cigar
Please do.
and have a little bit of scotch or whiskey during this conversation so I can loosen up a little bit.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that helps.
You're okay with that, right?
Yeah. I'm having a little of my own here. Behind the camera.
Can you hear yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Even though you're off camera?
Yeah.
Usually that's a good place for you, just to be off camera.
Uh-huh.
But maybe one day you'll be in front of the camera.
We'll see.
It's always better to be behind the camera, actually.
Really? Yeah. I like that better, actually. So.
Aren't you even curious what I'm smoking? It's a Dominican cigar from CAO.
Oh, wow.
Brazilian leaf. Got this about 10 years ago.
So
and then
when people can smoke.
drinking some Centauri from Japan,
Uh-huh.
which is a whiskey. If you ever saw the movie Lost in Translation, that was the whiskey that Bill Murray was speaking, advertising in the film.
Oh, wow.
Which actually is a real whiskey.
Uh-huh.
Not to be just, the Scotch is from Scotland, and the whiskey is from other places outside of Scotland.
So, tell me about your childhood and when you grew up.
Before my childhood, we should talk about my dad and my mom.
Uh-huh.
My dad was a career military. He served in the Marines. He when he was 18, he grew up in Rangeley, Colorado, and then when he turned 18, he came from a family heavy Mormon background and joined the Marines when he was 18. Never looked back in terms of the Mormon faith. And then he went to Korea in the last 3 months, 1953, before the armistice, and he was a heavy machine gunner, and which is the reason why he has some bad hearing. But from there he went and had a career in the military that took him all the way to Vietnam. And at that time, between those decades between Korea and Vietnam, he had switched over to the Army. They gave him they offered him a promotion at the time, so he actually gained a rank during that period. And when the war in Vietnam escalated to what it became, he was initially there. He served there twice as an advisor. And as an advisor, he was part of what they call MACV SOG, which was the Military Assistant Command Vietnam Special Operations Group. And he was a company commander in this area called Quang Ngai Province. And during that period, he had met my mom, who was a diplomatic translator for the Vietnamese government and the South Vietnamese Army.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so she came from a bit of royalty herself, and they had met and started a courtship and got married there towards the tail end of the war in the late 60s. And then going back during my dad's career in the military, he was a photographer.
Uh-huh.
He would shoot with Leicas and those type of cameras back then, and he would just take pictures of wherever he went, the conflict, and just the beauty of the nature of all the different countries that he was in. And then also at one point shooting for the magazine of the college that he attended. I believe it was in Kansas City. So my dad had this thing for photography that he loved, which obviously came down on me. And so I was born in 71 in Hawaii, where he eventually was, that's where he was stationed last.
Cut.
So in right before the Paris Peace Accords were signed, he got stationed in Honolulu, Hawaii, which was his last place where he served as a lieutenant colonel. And I was born in 71 there on the island at the military hospital, with my mom and my dad, and I don't really have any or zero recollection of that period of my life because I was like 1, 2, 3 years old, you know. But anyways, there was what changed his life and what changed my life through him was that he wanted to be a professional photographer. So he ended up seeing an ad in the newspaper in Hawaii about a photographer they needed in a company in San Antonio. So he answered the ad, and next thing you know, we're all packing up and moving to San Antonio, Texas, which is essentially where I was born. And then a year and a half later, or not too long later, my sister was born. So me and my sister. So
So how about the Mormon background? Were you raised as Mormons?
I wasn't really raised as a Mormon, but there was Mormonism obviously on my dad's side, and my mom had connections with Mormons, and apparently my mom had met some Mormons, I think, on her way in China, on her way to the States, and my parents got divorced when I was 8 years old, and my mom had these what they call home teachers visit her at home. And what home teachers are in the Mormon church is you have a pair of male adults who are assigned to look after another family. And so these two they're called home teachers, and these two home teachers would visit my mom once a month just to check in on her and see how she was doing and if she needed anything. So I always remember the home teachers visiting. However, for my dad, my dad was not a Mormon and was quite ambivalent about it, so it had nothing to do with him. Anyhow, I went through high school, and I had my feet in the normal friends world, and then I had my other foot in the Mormon world with my other Mormon friends.
I see.
And so I essentially became adopted into the Mormon church, and I kind of glad that happened, because at the time, if it did not happen, I could be in prison.
How so?
I don't know. Back then, you get in trouble. Me and my friends were full of angst, and we'd run around and little vandalizers. We'd vandalize things. And I never got into anything that was like auto theft or anything that was what you would be considered a felony, but a lot of shoplifting.
Yeah.
It's just hijinks like that, you know.
How old were you at the time?
It's just my high school years. Yeah. So anyway, so when I got into high school, at this time, my father, who had his photography business for this amount of period, he was really well known in San Antonio. This was all before digital, and he was kind of like the king photographer of San Antonio, and he would shoot these huge weddings, and he would shoot the mayor and the council people and all the high schools, and he was the guy, my dad. And then when I got a certain age, I would spend my Fridays with him. And then I remember my mom always using me to go to his workplace to get the alimony check. But anyway, so it wasn't until my freshman year in high school that my dad retired from that business, and then he started his third business as a fine art photographer. And so from there, he closed his commercial business down, and he moved to Colorado, back to where he was from. So he kind of went full circle in life. And then my high school years, all 4 years, I would spend my summers with him in Colorado, and it was my second summer there, which would have been my sophomore year. And during these summers, I would go on these trips with him, day trips, weekend trips, and he had a minivan, and he would go over and pull over and set up his tripod and set up the medium format camera. At the time he had, he's using Arca Swiss, I remember. He set up the bellows, and he set up the plates and everything, and he'd take all his notes. And I would just be sitting there in the car going through my own teenage angst, and this is all before cell phones, and you had to deal with this stuff by sitting in the car bored as hell.
I cannot imagine you without cell phone. I always see you going through something.
Yeah, so it wasn't until my second summer that one day we went into a camera store that a friend of his owned in Cortez, and he bought me my first camera. And he bought me a Pentax K1000. And the reason why he bought me that camera, instead of, at the time, the new digital cameras were coming out, or the smart cameras.
Yeah.
He wanted me to have a Pentax K1000 because he wanted me to learn the basics, because the Pentax K1000 is fully manual, and he wanted me to learn exposure by instinct. And which I did. And so we went out for the first time, and I remember it was my first outing with him, my first excursion, and we were taking pictures, and I was shooting columbines, which is the state flower of Colorado, and they're always in bloom in the summer, and I was doing close-ups of the columbines. And we came back, and
developed the film.
He developed the film, and I remember him looking at my very, very first set of images of the columbines, and he just knew, in his view, that I had a gift. And through his instant validation, I just knew I had a confidence in photography, especially composition. I think I have a very strong grasp of composition, and probably due to my dad and studying the photographers, like the F64 group, Ansel Adams, the West Coast photographers. I would look at their composition, and it was just, I just felt like I fit in.
Yeah.
So from there, from the moment where I had done my first set of photos, I knew at that point that I knew my direction in life. Because at that point, prior to that, I wanted to be an architect.
Oh, really?
I wanted to be an astronaut. I couldn't be in the military because I had flat feet, I remember. I remember one time I tried to join the Marines, and they wouldn't let me because I had flat feet. So I tried. And so I got a bunch, in high school, I was like the guy taking pictures. I was photo editor for the yearbook and newspaper. My senior year, I was a photo editor. And it was my senior year in high school that we won Tops in Texas, which is like winning state football in Texas, which is super serious, you know. So it's like, and through there, I got many scholarships, and I got a scholarship, I remember, to Savannah Art College. And I was so sick of Texas humidity, I just couldn't go to another place that had even worse humidity. But my dream was to be in California anyhow. So my dream at the time, or my goal at the time, was to go to Brooks Photography School in Santa Barbara. So I looked into that, and I got a bunch of great recommendations from photographers in San Antonio that I was interning for, that kind of stuff, and people who knew my dad. So I felt like I was going to be an instant shoe-in for Brooks. However, in order to go to Brooks, you have to have a, at the time we had the prerequisites before somewhere else. So I couldn't just immediately pack my bags and go to Brooks. I had to do all my prerequisites first. So I enrolled at UTSA, local school, somewhere, and started taking classes. And then something very, very personal happened to me in my life. I ended up having an affair with a woman in the church. If you've ever seen the film The Graduate,
Yeah.
that's kind of what happened to me.
I see.
So I was seduced by a woman in the church, and I got in trouble. And
Like older lady?
I was 18, she was 26, her husband was 34.
Oh wow, she was married.
Yeah, she was married. I had an affair.
Yeah.
And so, believe it or not, I left my virginity to a married woman. That's why I'm so messed up sexually.
I see. So this is the time that you went to those trips you told me?
Well, I went on all these trips during my high school years, but not the high school summers, you know. But now here I am graduating high school. And like I said, we had won tops in Texas for the top prize for our high school newspaper, which was called the Rampage. I went to John Marshall High School, and my teacher at the time, his name was Rob Thomas. He was the early writers for Dawson's Creek. So, if you know Dawson's Creek, that show back then, in some ways, I was kind of like the photographer in that TV show. You know, that was me in a certain way. And then Rob Thomas left because he had won tops in Texas too, and then he moved on and had a stellar career and moved to, eventually ended up in LA and created the show Veronica Mars. And so that was a big thing. But anyways, going back, I messed up and I had the affair with a woman, so I felt so bad about it.
So what price did you pay?
Well, I don't know if I paid a price. Well, yeah, of course I paid a price. I decided at the time to get my life right and turn inward and devote myself more to the church. So I ended up committing myself to going on a mission for the Mormon Church. So I went on my mission, and the price that was to be paid was that it took me like 2 years to go through this repentance process for me to get my mind right in the Mormon Church's view to go on this mission. And so I finally did that and went on my mission to South Korea. And unfortunately, during that period, Mormon serves 2 years, and a year and a half into my mission, my mom got sick, and I came home, in which that 3 week period, she had passed away from breast cancer. And she herself had a fear of hospitals, and I'm sure it has to do with her own childhood trauma. She had a fear of hospitals and didn't take care of herself, or she wasn't proactive like people are nowadays, or even back then people were proactive. And so, but at the time she had passed away during those 3 weeks, and I wanted to continue my mission. So I got reassigned. They weren't going to send me back to Korea, so I got reassigned to Houston, which ended up being a great blessing because I got reassigned to Houston under the Korean speaking language, where I served the Koreans in Houston. But it was an opportunity for me to meet all my Vietnamese relatives who were the refugees from the war who had ended up settling in Houston.
I see.
So my mission president gave me the opportunity to bond with them during my last 6 months, which I did, and ever since then I've been very close to them. So and I'm very, very happy to see that all of them have become very well-to-do and happy people.
So it kind of helped you.
Yeah, exactly. And there's always, you look at the positive, and so everything happens for a reason. And there's always adversity, so you have to deal with those things. What do you want to know? I think I just ashed on my floor.
Yeah. So
when I come, I should have the stuff out for me.
Yeah, of course. When did you come to Hollywood? When did you decided actually to finally come to?
I came to Hollywood the weekend of September 11th, 2001, the terrorist attacks.
No way.
Yeah, that's the week. It was Labor Day weekend, right? Labor Day weekend?
Yeah.
The terrorist attacks happened on a Tuesday morning. And I had come here that weekend. And I'm a huge Denver Broncos fan.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember the football season had just opened on Monday night. It was Monday Night Football.
Yeah.
The opening game. Well, no, it actually started on Sunday. But the first game was the Broncos at the New York Giants in New York. And the Broncos had won that game. So the next morning, I had been in Los Angeles and Studio City for not more than 48 hours. Or 72 hours. And I woke up that morning to get on the sports radio and hear about my team beating the Giants. Instead it was the terrorist attacks. And that was crazy. And but prior to coming to Los Angeles, I was living in San Diego.
Oh, tell me about that.
There was a whole period that we kind of skipped. I went on my mission, and then I finished my mission, and then I went to my college years. I went to Rick's College in Idaho, which is now a university. It was a Mormon college, and then from there I transferred to BYU in Utah, mm-hmm. and then I went through a lot of shit there too.
How different is a Mormon college? I don't know anything about that. How different is that from a regular
Mormon culture is great in many ways and quite distinct in the way they practice. They're very corporate people. They're very goal oriented, mm-hmm. and
I mean college. How is it different?
Oh well, the college is very strict. You know, you can't. You know, you can't drink caffeine. You can't drink coffee or alcohol or no smoking. You can't even have women. In your bedroom or anywhere near your bedroom. They can only come to the opposite sex can only go into the living room. Yeah. There's all these rules. And then on top of that, you have my roommates. You know, I remember at the time I had this Rolling Stone. Had a subscription to Rolling Stone magazine, and there was the issue. I think it was Jennifer Aniston was naked on the front cover because she was pregnant.
Oh,
or maybe it was Demi Moore. Yeah. Anyways, and I had that sitting in the living room, and they reported me for having nudity in the house. So I just the church was totally locked on me, and so I stopped going during those at a certain point. And on Sundays, I instead of going to church, I would go to Park City or Salt Lake City, or would plan my trips to see my dad in Colorado. To see how many Sundays I could knock out. You know what I'm saying? And at the time I was really, really, that's back when I was into football even more than I am now, and I would spend my Sundays watching football. And so I was kind of living under the shadows in the Mormon church. Fucking, you gotta get a better chair. Well, I think that was a sign.
You don't have any chair. Don't sit on it.
I think that was a sign. Don't talk bad about the Mormon church.
I know.
Or I'm going to get a piece of wood up my ass. So anyways, when I was at Rick's College, when I was at BYU, I was also working for the papers there. And the Mormon has their own, I guess the only way to say it is, they're really heavy in proselyting around the world, the Mormon missionaries and all that stuff. So they have to do their own media, so they make their own films. And BYU had its own film studios.
Wow.
So that was one of my jobs. I worked at the Mormon Film Studio, and I would check out equipment to the other students that were doing films. So I had access to equipment, and then I also was doing my photography for the paper at Rick's College and also at BYU.
So have they produced any mainstream movie that we know? Don't think so. Okay.
There was a guy. I don't want to get into that. There's been a few Mormons who have made some stuff. Napoleon, the guy who made Napoleon Dynamite.
Oh.
He was a Mormon. He made a short film actually at Rick's, I think in Idaho at the time, and then it got picked up. Oh, this is one of the cool things about going to BYU. I forgot about. This is when the Sundance Film Festival was kind of in its early years.
Yeah.
So I also volunteered for that, and I had because Park City and Sundance, which is at the time it was the resort owned by Robert Redford.
Yeah.
I don't know who owns it now or whatever, but I would go there, and I would deal with actual Hollywood film people, which were much different from the culture of the BYU Mormon film people I was dealing with. Because I would be watching rated R films, and in the Mormon Church you can't watch rated R films.
I see.
But I was watching rated R films. But the great thing about I'm not gonna bitch about my years at BYU, at BYU Film School, because I learned a lot too, and it gave me the opportunity to see films like Kurosawa and Bergman and these Godard and films that I would have never seen if I had not gone to film school. And so I actually learned a lot, and ever since then I've continued and maintained my passion for film. And I have a huge film collection, and that's what separates me from my father, is that I was mentored by my father through photography, but I went and had a separate passion for filmmaking. And not only filmmaking, but like music composing, editing, all the different departments to make a movie. You know, at the time I was reading about Scorsese and Spielberg and Kubrick and Coppola, all those guys. And then I got into music too, and my dad wasn't really that much into music, and luckily I had friends of mine who influenced me, and I started getting into Van Morrison and Tom Waits, and even the guy I told you about, Rob Thomas, that I grew up with. He introduced me to a whole different genre of music, like the Replacements and all that, that kind of music. And
so you went to San Diego?
Yeah, so I finished school and I went to San Diego. I left. One of the reasons why I left BYU is because I was going through some bullying from these guys I was hanging out with. So luckily at the time my sister was living in San Diego, and so I moved there, and I moved in with her, and I was living in Hillcrest in San Antonio, and I had never seen outwardly gay people before. I had never seen a gay guy that I knew of until that moment. And here I am in Hillcrest, which is a very affluent community in San Diego. We're heavily populated by gay guys, and the most nicest people. It was like, and my sister would take me to clubs, and she would take me to gay night to these clubs, and I would see these sea of men, like beautiful men, like. Beautifully hairless men, like guys you would see like in the military, the Marines or the Navy, just like. And I would look down, and I would just see this sea of male flesh, and I had never seen that before, and I thought it was cool. I wasn't shocked by it or anything. And anyway, so that kind of changed my life too. It definitely opened my eyes.
I see.
To sexuality and those type of things. Things that I almost felt I was sheltered by the Mormon Church, But all these years, ever since I got my first camera, I was studying photography. And then a third thing that separated me from my dad was my interest in fashion photography. So I started studying like Avedon and Helmut Newton and all these. I was getting Sports Illustrated, hanging them on my walls, the swimsuit issues, and like Ralph Lauren and a bunch of advertising. So I started looking at that, which also separated me from my father, which eventually took me to Hollywood. Like my dad would never. He's like anti-Hollywood.
I see.
That's why he lives in a small place in Colorado by the a town that doesn't even have one stop sign, or one stoplight, So I was just a city slicker, I guess. That's what I wanted. I wanted that, the lasciviousness of Las Vegas and Hollywood.
Yeah.
You know.
So, I think many people want to know, when did you started getting interested about art and like art, you know?
Well, like I said, when I was in high school, and I would go through like magazines like Vogue magazine and fashion magazines. I remember Sports Illustrated, all these magazines. I would cut out advertisements. Whether it didn't even have to be a beautiful woman, it could have been just like a Ralph Lauren furniture. And because I've always been interested in architecture since an early age. That's the one thing that architecture and design was something that I always thought was beautiful. So I looked at that stuff like design and logos and that type of things, and so I would hang them in my place, in my bedroom, salon style. So like you wouldn't see 1 square inch of my bedroom. And I remember one time my bishop walked into my bedroom, and I woke up. He came one morning, and I don't know. Maybe I think how rude that he walked into my bedroom. Actually,
I was going to say actually.
Anyway, so I remember waking up from a nap, and there's my bishop, and he's looking up at all the fairly naked women.
And he's fascinated.
and anyways, and I also remember in high school, my friends and myself, we would decorate our lockers with like Fredericks of Hollywood women, you know, like that kind of like. And I was into heavy metal, so I would have like Kiss and Motley Crue, and on, and half naked women.
I see.
I don't even think you could do that now in high school. I don't know if you could do that now these days.
I don't know.
My high school was like a weird mix of a Cameron Crowe film and who's that other guy? The guy who did Kids.
Who did Kids?
And Bully and all these movies. He's a photographer too. And my life was like that. It was a mix of like this weird. He did a movie called Marfa, but I think my life was like a cross between Cameron Crowe and that filmmaker. What the fuck's his name? So you have one of those moments where your brain can't remember something, so thank God we have these. And yeah, Larry Clark, he's the filmmaker. I didn't get into Larry Clark until in the last 5 years, actually. But I remember seeing Kids in I think it was high school, and I was like blown away. I couldn't believe I'd never seen filmmaking like that. Or I remember also seeing the film John Singleton's Boys in the Hood. I had never seen movies like that. Like the movies that I grew up with were like the Lethal Weapons and the Die Hards, action movies, Schwarzenegger, Bruce Willis, Rambo. You know, like these big, and those are the movies I want to go to LA. I want to make movies. You know, and then I started seeing like movies like Point Break and all these romance movies, LA Story, and. It also helped that a friend of mine that I grew up with also lived in Los Angeles. So, I just, palm trees and women and surf, that's what and skateboards. That was like what I wanted. And thank God I moved to San Diego because I got, it was a nice transition.
It's all about that stuff you said.
Yeah, I mean, California is so fetishy. It's really about the fetish. Cool. Like, that's what defines California and how California made everything cool to the rest of the world, you know? And it's that one word cool that I just feel like represents California and the aesthetic of what it's created. So I was, during my San Diego years, I was, you know, losing my virginity all over again, you know? I was reintroduced to women and having a good time, and I left the church and didn't look back, and I started smoking cigars, and for the first time I drank a coffee. I remember going to my first Starbucks.
You're kidding me.
Yeah, I went to my first Starbucks in La Jolla, and I got a Frappuccino. And then I got hooked on Frappuccinos and those make you fat. And then I just got to the point where now I'm a coffee connoisseur. You know that. It's like, I just like pure espresso, pure coffee. They call it nitro now, or there's all these different things. But yeah, it's like I can't even believe I went through my life without coffee. I went through most of my mature life without sex. And on top of that, no coffee.
Wow.
But I've always been an indulgent person. And I think that I just knew I'd end up in Los Angeles. But Los Angeles has changed a lot. Back then, even back then in the late 90s, it was like kind of a dirty place. I remember driving to Los Angeles and just on the 101 seemed dirty.
Yeah.
And even the signs, all the signs were like just dirty. Yeah, but it's like it's a lot cleaner now. To me, San Diego was clean and beautiful.
Yeah,
you know, and plus it was multicultural still. Multicultural, and I started looking at their art and the Chicano movement, which is what they celebrate a lot heavily in San Diego, which seems to be lost in LA culture, the Chicanos. People here kind of want to be a new generation. They look at the Chicanos as kind of an older movement, but back then it was like celebrated. And I had a girlfriend that was Chicana, and I learned a lot. And I would spend my time during my San Diego years. I would spend a lot of my time at on Coronado screenwriting. I read a bunch of screenplays because my goal at the time was to sell what they call the $1 million spec script, which is what Tarantino. He was the one at the time who shattered that whole thing. A guy who never went to high school. A guy who never went to film school, and he, you know the story about Tarantino. Who doesn't? He made it possible that any Joe Schmo could sell a screenplay. And,
he was a good writer.
And at the time, I was studying him, and I was like other screenwriters like Shane Black, who had wrote the Lethal Weapon films, and and then you're reading books on how to become successful in Los Angeles, Hollywood, how to sell the $1 million spec, stuff like that, And
so how many screenplays have you written?
At that time, when I was in San Diego, I wrote like 15 screenplays.
Wow.
I wrote anywhere from the big summer action blockbuster to character-driven films, man in search of God type of things, Or I actually wrote a screenplay called Core, and it was kind of like an Armageddon, like a Michael Bay Armageddon film, but instead of an asteroid coming to Earth, it was the core of the planet had a polar shift, and it was like the whole world got fucked up.
I see.
And then I wrote a movie called The Ark, and it was about the story of the Ark.
Yeah.
And then of course that movie was eventually made. So I was writing really, really epic stuff. And on top of that, I was writing. I wrote a movie about a guy in search of God or the meaning of life, and it was because of that screenplay I started reading Zen Buddhism, and Zen actually is what helped me overcome, the previous whatever trauma I had from Mormonism, or any trauma I had in life. Period. Zen really helped me, and then I started listening to Alan Watts and on, and that's what has really saved me is Zen.
So how old are you at the moment? Like
late. I'm getting into my 30s.
I see.
I went through my they call it a Saturn return in Zodiac. Saturn return.
What is that?
I'm a Sagittarius. What's your sign?
Pisces.
Okay, well that makes sense because you care for people.
Yeah. I'm
a Pisces rising, which I also care for people. Pisces are very caring people. Sometimes they care too much and they get in trouble. Yeah. They end up caring for the wrong people.
Tell me about it.
But a Sagittarius by nature, you're running around, you can't sit still, you're like the Dionysus. Eat, drink, and be merry. You don't hold any grudges. And then I found out that I was a Gemini moon, which means you don't fuck with me.
Oh.
So that's why I have kind of a low tolerance for being pushed around and being bullied. Anyway, so I went through my Saturn return, which is what you go through when you're 27 through 30, and it's the period of your life when you're leaving adolescence and entering adulthood. And so during my Saturn return is when I left the Mormon church and I transitioned into
that makes sense.
a life of inequity.
I see.
And where else? But where else can this be experienced? But places like Ocean Beach or Pacific Beach, Solana, up and down the coast. And those were the good times. Like I look back at my life, my San Diego years was the good times. And my last summer there in San Diego, I worked at SeaWorld as part of the lighting crew, which is probably the most funnest job I've ever had.
How so?
Yeah, you go there. I go to SeaWorld around 5 o'clock, check in with the crew, see where you're assigned that night in the park, because they have extended hours, and they have to reset the lighting for the night shows, including the fireworks that's shot off in the bay. Every single night there's fireworks. So at one point they were able to entrust me into being on the boat to pick up all the fireworks that landed in the bay.
Yeah.
And that was quite a spiritual thing, actually, for me to be by myself on the boat, even though I was picking up fireworks, but it was still a thing. I think that's when I actually learned that I love the ocean, and that I need to be around the ocean, and that kind of opened my eyes to this whole vastness of the ocean. That's where I find my therapy, actually. And being in San Diego or being on the coast is a place where I can't be anywhere else.
I know that you still love it. I've helped you with those films that you make. Yeah,
so we'll get into the film series later, but I definitely realized that I had a love for the ocean and the fetish of beach culture.
Yeah.
The clothing, the style, the coolness, the music, and then I think maybe I was born with it when I was in Hawaii. It was like part of my DNA. Is
maybe
that the spirit of Hawaii just got into me, being born there. And so I'm just an island person. Another thing you mentioned about art and how I got into it or even had a fascination by it. Is that better?
Yeah.
Is that I remember growing up in high school and I was really fascinated by David Hockney, and I remember seeing his photographs. He did these collages.
Yeah.
And I don't think there was anyone else doing it at the time. I was fascinated by the collages, and then I would look at his paintings, and he would do these paintings of Los Angeles pool culture, and I just thought those were like the coolest, most sublime things I'd ever seen. And I think also because I was doing so much black and white photography in high school and college and everything, that I needed color. That's why my bedroom growing up was an explosion of color. And I also needed, I knew that I was like a fan of Matisse and Chagall and other artists that are considered, they call it the Fauvist art. They would use really bright primary colors. Henry Matisse. Matisse, yeah. And so I was really interested, or I thought that kind of art was beautiful to me. Like, I wasn't really like Picasso or whatever was like whatever, but like the Fauvist colors was just something that really attracted to me. And then from Matisse, I saw this contemporary artist David Hockney painting in like these cool colors, like light blues and pinks and lavenders or whatever. And I think subconsciously that's where I wanted to be. I wanted to be in a Hollywood pool,